according to this, codes are true, but don't take my word for it here. We'll show you in detail why they are true. This is from Hashem saying, "Let there be light," and there was light, which is one of the first codes we're going to look at. Just to review quickly, we line up all the way we do codes is we line up all of the letters in the same length rows. So this is a row length of 10 in this example, and we remove all the spaces between the letters. This is a tradition passed down from the Middle Ages, Rabbeinu Bachia, and also carried on by the Kabbalist Rabbi Moshe Cordovero and others, and computerized in our time, in our generation, under the leadership of Professor Rips, inspired by Rabbi Weissmandel from the 1940s. And this is how all the codes are done for centuries, but only recently with the computer. So the width is a fixed width, in this case 10, and we can see order and food are every 10 letters parallel to each other. Roses is every 11 letters backwards. So that's the basic idea. And we're just going to start with simple echoes. An echo is a word or phrase that repeats in a code that comes from the text. So in the beginning, the first lines, the first words of the Torah. In the Hebrew, the grammar is created God, but in most languages, it's God created. So when the sages were dealing with the idea of translating the Torah to Greek, they wanted to put God first. And Hashem, of course, was aware of this 1,000 years before it happened. So Hashem encoded as a signal to us that he was aware of this. At least that's what it seems to me to be, a signal. He encoded the order of the words Elokim bara, God created, instead of in the beginning created God. And this code meets exactly with the phrase, the first three words of Torah. So it's an echo, albeit with a word order change. And this is one of the patterns that Professor Rips has cataloged, that just the same words in a different order.
Yes, just one remark. The first that spoke about the Rebbe changing the orders was Dr. Schwarzman.
He was one of the first to
Reversal order of words.
Very good. Dr. Schwarzman also invented dialogue mode. Of course, Hashem invented it, but Dr. Schwarzman discovered it in amazing patterns. Okay, now, so light is another example. Oh, by the way, I'm going to try not to get too technical, but just to give you a ballpark estimate here, there are 8 letters here in Elokim bara. So they're all common letters. So if we knew that this is the exact position it would occur in, and these are the exact words we were expecting, we would be able to multiply 10 times 10 to the 8th power, which is 1 in 100 million chance that it would occur exactly here. However, we have to take some taxes because it's a very big skip of 8198. So this is a very long row. So it could have occurred at a skip of 5 or 10 or any skip up to 8198, and it would have been even more impressive. So therefore, the taxes take into account this very large skip. And in a very rough way, you can divide the result by 8,000. You also have a tax because we would be equally happy if this occurred in any of these 15 positions or so, going frontwards or backwards. So that's about 30 ways of seeing this in an equally interesting position relative to the first 3 words of Torah. So 30 positions, 8,000 skips is a very high tax of about 250,000. But we started with a very high probability if we assumed that it would occur exactly where we see it, of 1 in 100, actually 1 in about 500 million, because it's a little bit better than 10 times 10 times 10. So it's about 1 in 500 million divided by the tax of 250,000, giving odds of about 1 in 2,000 that this occurs so close to the original words. So not bad for a first echo in the Torah. Okay. Now, light is the third verse in Torah. Hashem said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And by starting the echo demonstration at the very beginning of Torah, we're showing something very strong, because the first few verses of Torah are extremely popular and discussed quite a bit, of course, since they're the beginning. So, and we see an amazing echo here as well, found by Dr. Rotenberg years ago. First of all, Hashem said is repeated a few times. Let there be, Yehi, is repeated twice. And there was is repeated twice. Light is repeated twice. And the density of this is incredible. It's almost like having a long string with all of these letters, because with such density, you don't have much choice of where to put the letters. So that's it's an extremely strong result as well. And what we're going to do today is we're going to look at similar kinds of echoes, but instead of immediate echoes, we're going to look at words from Tanakh, the books following the Torah, starting with Joshua to the end of the Tanakh. We're going to look at pairs of words that occur next to each other in Tanakh as kind of signals to us, as to see if they echo, to see if they are prominently encoded in the Torah. So we're getting our words from Tanakh, and we're looking for them in the Torah. And we're finding many more than expected, and we only just began looking 3 weeks ago or so. So this is actually Rabbi Ephraim Reutman, who lives in Lakewood, and his 8th grade students are excited to learn about the codes for good reason, because they're very exciting, and he knows how to give it over, and he also knows how to find some of the best codes that we've seen, some of the simplest codes, which we will look at today. And his books are on this website. They are some of my favorite books. It's a great place to visit. And what we're doing today is similar to if we were on a ship and we're looking for a treasure at the bottom of the ocean. Where are we going to anchor the ship in order to start looking for this treasure? We have quite a large area to look for this treasure. So what happens if we're receiving some help from heaven? Let's say lightning strikes from heaven at a certain point in the ocean. And let's say that we've discovered that whenever lightning strikes in the ocean, that's where the treasure is buried. This is kind of what's going on with us with these new codes. Step 1 is to see where the lightning strikes. That's where we anchor. And step 2 is to find the treasure hidden below. So Tanakh words are going to act as our trigger to be our anchor. And this first example is a single Tanakh word that Rabbi Ephraim Reutman focused on in these passages from Zechariah. This is about Hashem's zeal for Yerushalayim. And the word zeal is repeated throughout the initial verses and later verses in chapter 8. And the idea that the zeal is for Yerushalayim and also for the mountain of Hashem, which is something we'll see later. The mountain of Hashem refers to Jerusalem, refers to the place where the third temple will stand, Ezrat Hashem, soon in our days. So this zeal that Hashem has is the key word that we're going to use for this first example. That's our anchor. And here is our anchor. Not only the word zeal with skip of only 3, which is very unusual, but also it echoes, the signal itself is echoing. A zealous God is in blue there, and it's right in the beginning of the 10 Commandments. So we found our anchor, we found our place to look. And step 2 is to find the treasure, and the treasure is right here below the anchor, next to the anchor. He will rebuild Jerusalem forever. To have so many long words in such a small area, the odds are just, we were looking at one example with Hashem created only 2 words. This is 3 words in a much smaller, in a very dense area. It hasn't been measured yet, but it's going to be one of our best. And our best codes tend to be 1 in a million plus. Okay. Now, this happens to have some additional words about rejoicing and singing, and that's also extremely interesting, not only from an emotional point of view, but from a technical point of view. These words repeat quite often when we are dealing with the third temple or Jerusalem or these kinds of concepts, or Mashiach, as we'll see in a little bit. So we can also look at word pairs, not just single words like zeal. And word pairs, the first example is going to be using Elohim and Yotzer or Yotzar. Hashem created, Hashem formed or is forming. This was a word pair from Isaiah chapter 45. And it also occurs, a similar concept occurs in the same chapter in verse 7. We say it every day in our daily prayers. Yotzer or uvrei hoshech. I form the light and I create darkness. So this idea of forming light is tied in with the original word pair of Hashem formed. But we're only going to use Hashem formed, and we're going to see what happens with that, because we're strictly taking 2 word pairs, and this is one of the ones that we found out of just a few dozen that we tried so far. Even I would say 10 that we've tried so far. So there it is in code, and it is crossed by the expression the light from light. And it's natural for us to look for light because of these verses in Isaiah, I form the light. So Hashem forms and light from light. Now, just to find the light would be, probably what we would be setting out to do, but we see from the extension that light is formed from light according to this code. And we go on further because when we find something interesting, we want to see if it repeats. That's something we didn't realize for a few years. And we always had to tell people, yeah, we really looked for these words. And people would say, well, maybe you looked for 1,000 other words. But what happens when you find something interesting and you repeat the same exact words, you're demonstrating that the Torah has a built-in validation, a built-in proof of its own encoding. So we look elsewhere and we find, I don't know if is this blocked by the pictures of us over here? On my screen, it's a little bit blocked. This code on the right. You can see the whole code. Maybe I'll move this. Does it help if I move this?
I see at least. Or misor with a skip of 4, right?
Yes, or the same words, light from light with a skip of 4, and crossing it is the same words again, light from light with a skip of 2063. So to have such a long expression crossing itself is very unusual. It's yet another echo. So that's already an interesting result. But there's 2 or 3 more things coming up. There's waves of light from light, which reminds us of
Who knows that actually the light is from waves? Isn't a more modern concept that the light is waves?
yes,
It's
and
absolutely modern concept.
for sure, and the fact that it's encoded right there is extremely interesting. And now but again, we're not going to take statistics for this one, but we're going to write it down in our vocabulary, and we're going to see if it happens again. So now this is unbelievable right here. The light from Hashem. This is 11 letters. And from what we have so far, it's exactly matching our vocabulary that we've been building up. In the first code we had, Hashem forms the light from light. So it makes perfect sense that the light is from Hashem, using our very limited vocabulary. And to have 11 letters line up like that is way beyond 1 in a million. You have a tax again, because it could have been anywhere here near this horizontal expression, but I'd have to calculate it. I think it's 1 in a million after all taxes are taken. Don't quote me on that. It's at least 1 in 100,000. I stopped counting after a while because it takes more effort than it's worth. I'd rather discover new codes. But there are definite methods to measure exactly. Okay, by comparing to other texts. So, waves of light is added to our vocabulary. And what happens next? We find, actually, Chaim Meir Pollack, also on our team, found these interweaved expressions. Both of them occur, this is a skip of 45, with the same horizontal letters that we had before, the same positions. But at skip 45, he noticed light occurs twice, the light with light in blue. And interweaved there, we have waves of light. And from Hashem, the short version, the short word for Hashem, Mekel. So the same vocabulary, waves of light from Hashem. Now these interweave patterns are kind of interesting. They're a bit new. We've seen them in recent months more often, and they're almost as good as a long expression, because there's no better way to pack letters so closely in a straight line. If you have the original, the second best is to have an interweaved pattern. So this one, and remember, this whole thing was triggered by this lightning striking the ocean, which is these two words from Tanakh, Elokim Yotzer, Elokim formed. So the whole thing grew out of that. Here's the code, here's the light from light, here's light from light again, with waves in front of it, with Hashem, the light from Hashem, with the same themes again, waves of light and light from Hashem, all springing from those two words from Tanakh. So it's a very powerful signal that we're getting from these word pairs from Tanakh. Now, in actual fact, some of this was found in a different order, but after the fact, we can see that the lightning strikes in the same place where we had already found a treasure the hard way. Okay, so what kinds of things do we measure? We pretty much have to have all of the ducks in a row. We have to have all of these different factors taken into account when we do measurements to statistically analyze. Whether something is anchored is very important. And it was anchored in the last example by the words light from Hashem formed, and the length and the distance and the density. We'll talk about all these things, but I'm just going to go quickly through the idea. Oh, I see people are waiting to come in.
Yeah, I think I sent the link to Lowell as well.
Very good. Hi, Aryeh. Thank you again for organizing this series. So these are the different things that we measure when we're trying to find statistically what's going on with codes. Length of the code is critical. All of these things are critical. If some of them are very strong, one or two of them, that's enough to make a strong code in many cases. When you have all of these things happening at once in a strong way, which is what we'll see today, then it's completely off the charts statistically. Okay, but length, just looking at length by itself, if you have a 5-letter ELS versus a 10-letter ELS, it can be 25 times more significant with the longer ELS, or even 1,200 times more if it's a length of 16. Very roughly, depends on the letters, of course. Distance, if that pink square represents a place where we could have a second ELS. In the middle, we have a single ELS, and on the top, we could start at the very top for our second ELS, or we could start, if we started adjacent, joining that ELS, it's 500 times more significant than if we started at the top. And the reason is, as you can see, there are a couple, 250 places plus to place that ELS. So having it occur exactly adjoining the first ELS is rare to that tune of 250 multiplied by 2, because it could go in either direction, and the ideal direction is the same direction as the original. So that's why 500 times more significant for the position, for the distance away from the starting ELS. The skip is also critical. If you have a skip of 16,000 versus a skip of 16, you have 1,000 times more significant result. Density, if you have 3 ELSs separated versus together, it can be 1,000 times more significant. And we always have to compare to other texts, no matter what these other measurements tell us. We must compare to other texts to really get an accurate measurement of statistics. And that's what we're doing all the time in order to arrive at the statistics. And you can't compare the exact same words that you used. You have to have the same freedom of choice when you compare other texts, and that can be complicated to set up, but it's necessary. Okay, because in other texts we find the spread out arrangements, and in the Torah we find the dense arrangements typically. So some of these measurements have extreme power. For example, when you have a series of codes, I mentioned that this code has these other words of joy and singing that are repeated in a whole series of codes, and that adds tremendously to the power of the series. Now, this idea of joy should be tempered with some realizations, according to at least this book that I picked up recently, and he quotes the sages extensively. The happy ending will unfold at the right moment, but leading up to that, we don't necessarily have an easy time. But the happy ending is guaranteed. Welcome. Okay. I'm hearing an echo of my voice for some reason.
Oh, shoot.
Maybe turn your audio off if you're able to do that. Okay, I think it's okay. All right. So length is another very powerful measurement. These ELS is about the waves of light, and light from God are long expressions because they're intertwined, and it makes a big difference in the outcome. Density, in this case, is extremely dense, twice for each word. That adds tremendously to the outcome. So let's return to this echoing idea, this anchoring idea from word pairs. We're looking at a second example of this. And this was found from found from Chaim Meir Pollack, this series of codes, but we were able to find the same codes by looking at this word pair of Yud-K Vav-K with Ekieh, I will be. That word pair occurs in 3 places in Tanakh that are listed here. So we look for them as codes. So we have Yud-K Vav-K Ekieh occurring in this very interesting place that we'll explore. Chaim Meir Pollack found the same words circled in red overlapping each other. So they are rewritten over on the side. Hashem, I will be, overlapping each other. So this is an echo of the original word pair, but that's only the first of about 3 very dense occurrences in the same area. Here we have the mountain of Hashem, which refers to Yerushalayim, to the mountain of Moriah, where the third temple, where all the temples stood and will stand. The mountain of Hashem is Yerushalayim, the Har HaMoriah. And this passage is actually Bereshit 22:14, where Avraham almost sacrifices Yitzchak. And the commentators, the Onkelos, as well as Rabbeinu Bachaya, talk about the idea that the word here is Hashem will see in the Hebrew. Yireh is he will see. Not that Hashem is seen, but he will see. What will he see? He will see that this place where Avraham almost sacrificed Yitzhak is destined to become Har HaMoriah, where the third temple, where all the temples will stand. And he's also seeing that the Jewish people merit this because of Abraham's near sacrifice. So in this same verse, we see the 3 words of Har Hashem with Yireh, and those words are exactly echoed in the code. Another phenomenal result on top of this original result. And there's a third, those were the results there, but they're packed very densely. And we already knew this was one of the best codes. So we're going to see one more echo of word pairs. Again, I've only tried a dozen or so echoes, a dozen or so examples of some strong word pairs from Tanakh. And we're seeing 3 or 4 amazing results already. But before I get into that, I'm just going to introduce this idea of the temple. It's kind of a foreign idea to most people today. Even Jews don't think about it very often. But a good third of the Torah, perhaps, is involved with this house that we're building for Hashem. He built the world for us, so we're building a house for him. And how exactly do we build it and what should be contained in it? It's very detailed in the Torah, because this is where Hashem's presence will be tangible when we walk into this holy temple. And Mashiach is destined to help to rebuild the temple. So this idea of the temple and Mashiach and Hashem's presence, and there's also the upper and lower worlds. There's a temple in the heavenly spheres, as well as the temple on our earth. So, and also the idea that the next world is referred to as Gan Eden, the world above, the Garden of Eden, and that when there's peace in the world above, there's peace here in the world below. So all these ideas are very central to Judaism, and a great many of them are going to be seen in a single code. So we start with just the idea of shalom bayis. This is peace in the home. It's another central idea in Judaism, and it refers to peace above and below. And we see an extension here, which is an incredible weaving of all of these words. We have shalom bayis. Actually, shalom extends to Me'alatav, his upper chambers, and bayit extends to Beiti, my house, Simcha Boi. So my house of joy, enter. So all these things are interweaved with each other from a very simple starting point. And this is 22 letters. We had a very old code from 9/11 days about bin Laden, which is also 22 letters if you don't count the letters of bin Laden. So 22 for all of these above and below. And this turned out to be something like 1 in a million, based on the methods of Claude Shannon and also some other checks that we did, and also some yeshiva students who reviewed the results. So you know, as a conservative number, this would be 1 in 100,000, because it's not as many free letters, because we started with we started with shalom bayis. In any case, it's an extremely long, significant sentence. But now we finally can talk about these anchors, because in the same code, we have 3 anchors. We have from Amos chapter 9, his upper chambers in heaven, Bishamayim Me'alatav. That Bishamayim is in red twice. You can see it horizontally and vertically, and it's joining with the other word to form that word pair. Isaiah talks about, in one verse, it lists about 5 or 6 names of Mashiach. Sar Shalom is one of them, Prince of Peace, and that's also occurring in this code. Finally, there's an 8-letter word pair, the house in my name. And if you look at all these things together, it's the same themes we were just talking about. The house above, the Garden of Eden, joy, peace, upper chamber, Prince of Peace. So not only are these word pairs repeated, but the theme is maintained by all of these things. So 1 in a million is a vast understatement. Someday I'll have the time and resources to measure it. Okay. But what is interesting is that everything that we said was important is combined in this single code. Usually you'll only need a few of these, but we had everything. We had we had it anchored by these three different word pairs from Tanakh. We had long length, we had distance, extremely small distance and density, an extremely small skip of 6, by the way. And it's part of a series because these themes are repeated in other codes. And the vocabulary is repeated from Tanakh. So it's not a free vocabulary after all. So I want to talk about this simpler series of just 3 words, Messiah, joy, and revenge. We've known about these for quite a while. The smallest skip of Mashiach, we have Mesos, which is joy. And it's repeated with the word revenge in green at a small skip as well. So Messiah and joy with revenge. And those 3 words are repeated in a second place and in a third place. To have them repeat only once is already interesting. So this is a very strong, simple repetition. And the idea of revenge in Mashiach is echoed, or let's say that idea is brought out in this long sentence about bin Laden, that revenge belongs to the Mashiach. And we also have the idea of joy with Mashiach in a long phrase on the left side. These long phrases are very rare and very strong, and for them to use these words that are so simple and so repetitious is extremely strong. And on the right is a different arrangement of the same words. Joy is coming, Mashiach will rise on high, are the words that are repeated. And there are other places as well with small skips, relatively under 100. Here's joy with Mashiach. And look at these extensions. Tishbi, which is another name for Elijah the prophet, Eliyahu Hanavi, who was supposed to be accompanying Mashiach. And he will redeem them. Extremely strong continuations. And again, joining the word as opposed to being over on the side is extremely strong. And we can recombine these things, Tishbi with Mashiach, and joy appears. Joy with Tishbi and Mashiach appears. Soon in our days. This was the formal part that I had prepared. I have some other things if people want to stay for another 5-10 minutes. This is the name of Hashem, Yod Kei Vav Kei, the Tetragrammaton. In yellow, it occurs at skip 55, and all the skips are listed on the right. These happen to be Fibonacci numbers, if you know what they are. You add 1 and 2, you get 3. You add 2 and 3, you get 5. You add 5 and 3, you get 8 over here. You add 5 and 8, 13. 13 and 8 is 21. 21 and 13 is 34. 34 and 21 is 55. This is the Fibonacci series. It's found throughout nature. So to have Hashem's name right in the beginning of Vayikra, with all of these things, as Professor Rips discovered, is actually another phenomenal result and very simple. And some of these longer echoes are also found quite often. Is there another meeting now that people are trying to get into? Because I notice.
No, they're trying to get into this class. Some people wrote they're trying to get in.
So into the Torah codes class?
Yes.
Okay, great. Fine. So I could give a super quick recap Okay. So I will do that. And feel free to email me because some of this is going to be very fast right now. And also that website can lead you to other resources. So codes are formed by equal spaces, equal length of rows. The letters form, every row has the same number of letters. And we find simple echoing. In the beginning, created God. The Hebrew grammar was switched when the sages were translating this. They wanted to say God created, and that is actually encoded. So Hashem apparently knew that there would be this switch. This is related to the Septuagint, the Greek translation, but it's encoded in the Hebrew to show that Hashem knew that there would be such a Greek translation 1,000 years after the giving of the Torah. Light is echoed. Hashem said twice, there will be twice, there was twice, or light twice. Very dense, very significant. This is Rabbi Ephraim Reutman, who has found some of the codes that I'm showing today, and his students are excited for good reason, because the codes are off the charts that he's found with the latest techniques. His website is here. Some of my all-time favorite books are on his site. Now, we're going to use a method of letting heaven direct our search. So if we see lightning strike, we're on a ship and we're looking for treasure. If we see lightning strike in the ocean, we're going to follow that, and that's our signal from Hashem that we will find a treasure there. So we're going to anchor wherever we see that lightning. And in this analogy, the anchor, the lightning is going to be words from Tanakh that appear as codes. And this first example was with a single word from Tanakh, which is the word zeal. And that is repeated quite a bit in Zechariah, because Hashem has great zeal for Yerushalayim, where his house will be rebuilt, the mountain of Hashem, Yerushalayim. So that's our step one. That's our anchor, is the word zeal. And we find it in code echoing itself. Zeal vertically in yellow, and a zealous God in the beginning of the 10 Commandments. So we anchor here. We see we look for treasure right here. And there it is. He will rebuild Jerusalem forever, encoded in an extremely dense area, right next to where the lightning struck. Okay, and other words about joy and singing, which are repeated in other codes throughout what we found in recent months. So we're also going to look at word pairs, not just single words. And here we have the words Hashem created, or formed, sorry. These are word pairs. These are side-by-side words from Tanakh, and we're using them as our signal to anchor. So we're looking for these words in Torah. And I've only checked a dozen of these or so. So it's an extremely strong pattern. There's several dozen left to really check. Okay.
You're missing obvious ones, though. You're missing all, like right next to that, you have the Yotzer. You also have in the word Haaretz, you also have there.
Yes, well, what happens, yes,
and Hashem, yeah.
For sure. What we do, we actually try, maybe mute your speaker because I think I'm echoing.
Oh, sorry. Oh.
Thanks. So we try all of these because, and what happens is we're looking for very small skips, and only a few of them, only several dozen, end up even being in the Torah in code. So that's why we don't have a huge job to look at every pair. We start by looking at every pair, but only the ones that appear with small skips. Those are the lightning strikes that cause us to look further in those places. So yeah, we do look at every pair, except we remove short words, the two-letter words. Okay. Great question, because that is what I wanted to clarify that. So Hashem forms, God forms, is right in a code with the light from light. And we see that he forms the light. We say it every day in our prayers. And this is exactly what we see in the code.
Can I ask one thing really quickly?
Yeah.
Because can you put the psukim back up? I see right over
Yeah.
there, they're in your face. You have Yitzhara, and then you have Haaretz is also Asur. They're not just there, they're everywhere, all over. They're
Yeah.
in the pasuk too, backwards and forwards. And do you see it? Yitzhara, it's also Lashem. Yitzhara is also Yitzhar right there.
You're seeing a code, or you're seeing the actual word?
You have the same word repeating itself in all the psukim right by you, backwards and forwards, that you didn't point out.
In this pasuk or this one?
Yeah. Wait a minute. I'll tell you 1 second. So it says here, Lashevet Yitzhara. So right there, you have the Tzur right there. Then you have Haaretz is also Tzur backwards. Yitzhara. You have the Tzur right there. Yitzhar. That's the same. That's also the same word.
Yitzhar, yeah.
And then you have Elokim Yitzhar Haaretz, and there you have it backwards, Tzadik Reish, right there next to, so it's Sar Tsar, there and there, yeah.
Okay, yeah. These kinds of short patterns you'll find, yeah, it might be significant here. We're doing a very specific thing where we're just taking two complete words, but yeah, it is endless, and you can find endless patterns. What we try to do is we come up with a method that is simple, so that we can measure it. It's kind of limiting in a certain way, but it's also enabling us to prove something in a very focused way. So our method was just to take the two words, but yeah, the others are interesting patterns as well. So yeah, so what happens? We find the light from light, and in a different place in Torah, we find the same expression, light from light, crossing itself. So that's already significant. Then we find waves of light from light, which is a reference to modern physics. And then we find the light from Hashem, which is like 11 letters, which is completely off the charts, to find it right here. And then we find Chaim Meir Pollack found these two interweaved expressions, the light with light parallel in blue, and waves of light, and interweaved here from Hashem, from Mikhail. So phenomenal. And it's all started by this lightning strike of Elokim Yatzar. That's where we started to find the treasure, from this one expression. Okay. Now, what are we measuring? A bunch of things. For example, length of the ELS. So this length of 5 is compared to length of 10, just 25 times more significant, 1,200 times more significant if it's length of 16, very roughly, depends on the letters. Distance, if you start at the upper left corner versus if you start right here, attaching an ELS to another one, it's 500 times more significant. And that's because you have 250 places to place it, and you have 2 directions to go. So that's the reason. The skip, if you have a skip of 16 versus a skip of 16,000, the 16 will be 1,000 times more significant. Density, if you have this pattern versus this one, it's 1,000 times more significant. So all these things are taken into account by the automated comparison to other texts. You have to use other texts in order to measure what's going on. If it happens only once in 1,000 other texts, then your odds are 1 in 1,000. But you also have to do the comparison in a fair way, and that's complicated, but we're learning better and better how to do it as we go. So a normal book versus the Torah, we have the same words often in the normal book, but we have them clustered in the Torah. So some of the measurements have extreme power, actually just about all of them. When you have a series of codes, like I was alluding to before, this theme of joy is coming up over and over again in reference to the temple and in reference to Mashiach. So then it's also very strong. But we also have, of course, an unknown amount of difficulties coming up before Mashiach. We pretty much guaranteed of a happy ending, but we just have to be able to, if we know in advance, the theme of this book is that if we know in advance what the difficulties are and why the difficulties are there, then it's a much easier time that we're going to have getting through those difficulties. And I like that idea. So I just recently found this book, and I'm including it in case anyone's interested. And he quotes the sages quite a bit, and the prophets. Okay. The length, when we have these interweaved things, they are almost as strong as a long phrase. The density, like in this example, is almost as good as a long phrase as well, because there's only so many places you can pack so many letters together. Okay, and we're going to see now another example of lightning strike using word pairs from Tanakh, but I have to introduce it first with, this one I can do right away. Let's see. Yeah, this one is Yud Kei Vav Kei with Ekiyeh. They occur together, and they echo themselves because those circled letters are actually overlapping Yud Kei Vav Kei with Ekiyeh. So the same thing echoes. And the mountain of Hashem alludes to Har HaMoriah in Yerushalayim, because this is where, this very verse we're looking at is where Avraham almost sacrificed his son. And the sages say that Hashem will see that this place is the place that the temple will be. And there is the name of the place that Avraham gave it, echoed perfectly in the code. And not only that, Moriah is right there, the mountain, Moriah. All of this came from the simple echo of the simple word pair from Tanakh, Yud Kei Vav Kei with Ekiyeh. All of these things together that Chaim Meir Pollack found. Okay, and another example of word pairs. This is from Ephraim Reutman, but I will introduce it with this idea of what is happening with the temple, and it's a very central idea in Judaism, in the Torah. A huge amount of the Torah is devoted to speaking about how to create this temple, what the measurements should be, what should be in the temple. And the reason for the temple was to be able to sense Hashem's immediate presence, which is something we didn't experience. Mashiach will help build the temple, the third temple. There's a temple concept in the upper worlds and the lower worlds. The upper worlds are often referred to as Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden. And when there's peace above, there's also peace below. All of these concepts we're going to see in the code to follow. It starts with simply Shalom Bayis, peace in the house, interweaved. And both of these interweaved phrases continue for an extremely long phrase. My house of joy, enter, is the first weaving, and the other weaving is peace in his upper chambers. So already we're getting some of these concepts that we just discussed. And this reminds us of this older code of bin Laden because of the length. It's actually 22 letters here, which is the same number of letters of this one, not counting bin Laden. And it has a similar cohesiveness. The words relate to each other very well. So very conservatively, it could be 1 in 100,000 just for this long interweaving string. But now we're getting to finally the anchors, the lightning strikes from Tanakh. And what we see is 3 different ones. In Amos 9, we see the upper chambers in heaven, which is what we see in red here in the code. Heaven twice and upper chambers once. And we see in Isaiah one of the several names for Mashiach. They're all listed together in this verse. Prince of Peace is one of them, Sar Shalom, and that's also here. And the third one, the house in my name, Habayit Lishmi. This is what Hashem was talking to King David about. King David wanted to build a house for him. And Hashem said, it's a great idea. I like it. But your son Shlomo will do it. And Shlomo built the first temple. And this is the theme we're talking about here. And it's right here in this code. So 3 lightning strikes in one code is pretty unlikely. And actually, since Mashiach is descended from King David, then also the third temple will be the same idea. Bezrat Hashem. So as an extremely conservative number, I'm putting 1 in a million. But it's one of the best codes for some time now, because everything that we were looking for is in this code. It has the anchoring from the 3 verses in Tanakh. It has the length of the phrases. It has the close distance and the density, and the skip is only 6. And it has some of the ideas are in a series of other codes, and the vocabulary is coming from Tanakh in large part. So it's checking all the boxes. All the ducks are in a row in this one. It's one of the best. So we're looking for also some simpler examples, and we've had these for quite a while. The ideas of Messiah and joy and revenge. The smallest skip for the Messiah is continued in the other direction with joy, masos. And if we look for that in a different place in Torah, we find it together very strongly, along with the word revenge in green. And we find it a third time and a fourth time very tightly together. So we also find it in this sentence about bin Laden that revenge belongs to Messiah. So not only that, we find the ideas of joy and Messiah in another long sentence, which is reflected not only in the left side, it's also encoded again on the right side in a different place with the same skip of 8. And we find many additional matches with joy and Messiah with small skips. This one is another name for Eliyahu Hanavi, Elijah the prophet, who is going to accompany Mashiach, and he will redeem them, is an extremely fitting phrase, and to be continued at the ideal spot right next to the original word is also extremely strong. And then when we look for recombination of these ideas, we see Tishbe and Messiah meet with Joy, and Joy and Tishbe meet with Messiah. So soon in our day. I had to go fast to repeat everything, but I'm happy I did, because I think it's worth repeating. So if there's more questions, I'm happy to stay. And again, feel free to email me offline at any time and check the site. And again, thank you to Professor Rips
I
for
have a
being.
question.
Yes,
Can you find the date? Has Eliyahu, Tishbe, this and that? How about a date?
we
Get
wish.
down to Chris.
We wish.
Avraham, I wanted to ask you not just the date, but I'm sure you know about this whole thing with what Rabbi Pinchas Winston brings about the Leshem and Tias Amesim in 5790, the 210 years before, I believe 6,000. So it's 5790. Is that in there somewhere?
I have not seen dates with any kind of backing, any kind of statistical backing, and I have not looked so much. I don't. The main reason I'm interested in codes is to validate that the Torah came from Hashem. And there's also this idea of joy, this idea that revenge exists for these crazy acts that people are bringing into the world. So since those ideas are simple and they repeat quite a bit, it gives me some comfort that there's purpose to the end of days, and it's a good purpose. And the Torah was given to us by Hashem. So those are the things. Those are the themes that I try to validate over and over again in simpler and simpler ways. And I think the words from Tanakh are giving us a very simple method of showing yet another phenomenon of repetition, another type of echoing or repetition, another validation that this couldn't have been produced by a human being.
Okay. Is there any more questions from anybody?
Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Professor Rips, again, for all the help over the
Thank
years.
you.
Thank you, Aryeh, for this forum, and fellow team members, Ephraim Reutman and Chaim Meir Pollack and Leib Schwartzman and Igor Pasetsky and
Nachum Bombach.
Nachum Bambach.
Some of these we are pioneerly found by Nachum Bombach.
Yes. We're many of us who were involved in 20 years, 25 years ago are getting back together and making some new discoveries. So it's a very exciting time.
All right. Thank you to everybody, and